Welcome to the MSDW podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at MS Dynamics World. On this episode, I welcome back Guus Krabbenborg. He's a Dynamics channel veteran who works regularly with partners and customers, helping them focus on issues related to ERP success. We discuss some of the challenges that customers and partners in the Dynamics 365 Business Central channel are facing today, and why some of the mistakes seem to come up repeatedly. Even though ERP buyers and partners now live in a cloud-first world, Guus makes the case that a lot of the on-premises software mindset still hinders planning. Guus also has a new range of training offerings in his masterclass series, and he tells me about how and why he's developed those. He also shares some stories about recent engagements with clients, including some of the difficulties he's encountered. And finally, we talk about some of Guus's plans and outlook on the Directions EMEA 2024 partner event, which we are both attending in November. All right. Hi, Guus. Welcome back to the podcast. Great to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're officially a veteran of the MSDW podcast. I believe this is at least your third visit, and it's always fun to talk to you, whether we're recording or not. So, thanks for being here. I wanted to start with maybe just an update from you. I think one of the big things that you've done recently is launched a new website, ERP Master Classes, and maybe you could explain a little bit about what led you to do that, and that might help our listeners understand why we're talking again.
Sure. So I am active in this channel for more than 20 years, 25 years, I think, this year. I worked a lot with partners all over the world in training, coaching, inspiration, if you want, or some might say provocation, all fine, in leadership, in sales and marketing, in project management and customer satisfaction. But over time, I found out, Jason, that the customer deserves more attention than they have today. And my observation after these 25 years is that the channel still is very much focused on the software. They eat the software, they drink the software. Some people, there's rumors that they sleep in pajamas with Dynamics 365 on it. It's products everything. But I found out in those years that, helping the customers understand what they want, helping the customers prepare for success is something that's on the last page. So after, trying to motivate partners to spend more time on doing that and put something in structure, I decided to open a website called erpmasterclasses.com to help partners suggest their potential customers or existing customers go to that website and consume those masterclasses, but also to help and inspire partners, like to train their own people to become more of a trusted advisor, helping customers to be successful rather than just focusing on the product.
Yeah, that's such an interesting observation from your point of view, because you have these partners who I would say usually they want their clients to be successful. And like you say, they eat, sleep, breathe the product itself. And in that sort of dynamic between those two forces, perhaps, you don't always have a recipe for success if you don't try really hard to bridge those gaps. Maybe that's another way of saying what you just said. But I think what it says to me is that partners know that they need a strong and maybe more holistic relationship with their customers. Is that true?
That's true, definitely. But I think it starts one step earlier. And that step earlier is, what is your definition of project success? So I was in Prague a few months ago for a workshop that I did for a partner. And the question was, what does project success look like? And I asked one in the room, and he said, well, there was a consultant or a project leader saying, if we stay in time and budget, and if we make enough billable hours, or we exceed the budget, but the customer is willing to pay the invoices, then it's a successful project. As you feel, that's typically looking inside out from the interest from a partner. And then other people in the room said to him, you cannot define as a partner what success looks like, because you do the project not for yourself, but for your customer. So then we moved into an interesting discussion. Who can decide what success looks like? Who can define it? Who can measure? And the ultimate conclusion, after I think an interesting discussion there, was there's only one entity in the world that can decide if the project was successful or not, and that's the customer.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I can see why a partner would think the other way, that, oh, well, operationally, we executed the project, we assigned our resources, we fulfilled the statement of work. We then were able to staff them on another project, and we were able to meet our payroll, and all of our duties were all satisfied. So we're successful. But and that might work for some amount of time, but I think the two sides of that debate would meet at some point, and you can't carry on without the other definition of success, which is the customer declaring or agreeing that they felt it was successful and met their needs. So it's an interesting philosophical / business argument.
Yeah, well, if you dive a bit deeper in the motivation to define success as staying in time and budget, or the customer pays all the invoices, even if it's more than budgeted, then you'll find out, Jason, that still many partners measure and compensate their teams in what I call the on-premise way. And I mean, let's call it the old-fashioned way. The traditional way of doing things is make as many billable hours as possible, make sure the customer pays the bill, then you have a fantastic life, you win your bonus, the company's doing great. But then the question is, where's the customer in that perspective? And the focus on revenue and margin is not just something that partners do, but let's be honest, vendors do the same. So Microsoft has had awards for partners. In some countries they skipped it, in some others it's still there. But 9 out of 10 times the awards are for the biggest revenue, the fastest grower, the biggest new partner. It's all about money. And I would love to see Microsoft, but also to see partners start thinking in success. Because we all know the difference between on-premise and cloud, but from a billing perspective, from a money perspective, on-premise was, they just pay a fortune for a license. And even if you screw up the project, quote unquote, it's not so important or you don't care. Where in subscription world, customers pay a small amount of money per month, and the challenge is to get them satisfied so that they stay with you for long years over the rest of their life. So success is way more important, in my humble opinion, in the world of subscription and cloud than it was in the traditional world. And that means that partners should have a discussion. How do we compensate? How do we measure? How do we reward our teams? And I think, the likes of Microsoft and other vendors should do the same. Because if you focus on money, your customers might run away because they're not happy. And if you focus on happiness, they will stay with you. Your churn is small or zero. And that means automatically that your money comes in. So I would say it's another way of thinking. In November, I will do a presentation at Directions EMEA in November. And the session title is something like, so your solutions are in the cloud, but what about your team and your mindset? And that points out specifically to the example I just gave and other examples. Many partners still behave in the on-premise way, in the traditional way, and I think that's not good.
And one of the things I always come back to when I hear you talk is the fact that, like you said, at Directions EMEA, you'll be speaking to a partner audience, right? Not to customers. And it's just so interesting that partners have to hear this message and that they are receptive to it. I mean, I've seen you present and to mixed audiences or maybe to both sides before, and they're both open to it. And yet this gap still remains, even though you've been promoting these concepts for a long time. And I think you have examples from the customer world and from the partner world that show that there's a lot of sense to it on many of these points, but people just need to keep hearing it. Is that the case here? That in your experience?
True. Why should you change something because on a conference you hear a brave or bold Dutch guy from a small country say something, right? Of course, partners have to deal with customers that don't want to change. But they're human beings, and human beings have problems with change, as we all know. But inside the partner organization, there's also people and humans working. So it's not strange that partners also have like difficulties with changing. Everybody should agree. We should see the benefits. A lot of people, like my age, not sure about you, they will say, "Why should we do it? Because we've always done it this way. My father did it this way. My grandfather. You know how this works." So
Sure, sure.
repeating messages sometimes can help. I see partners that move. I was a year ago in a German partner for a 2 day workshop, and they really changed everything, the way they measure, the way they compensate. They completely changed their website and the messages. And the website now said not saying buy our product. They don't sell a product, but they sell success, whatever it looks like, because it's up
Hmm.
to the customer to define it. So they completely changed their mindset. So I would say it's possible. And small joke for the German audience: when even the Germans are able to do it, then it must be possible for other countries that are maybe less conservative to do the same, right? And in the end, if I were a potential customer, potential buyer of Dynamics 365, and there's two vendors on the shortlist, two partners, and I would ask the question, so how do you measure and compensate your team? And the one would say, Goose, we measure on how much we invoice you. And the other says, we measure on how happy you are. What do you think? What I like to do, and what would I choose for? So I think it's beneficial for customers to buy from partners that put customer happiness and customer satisfaction as their number one target and not money. In fact, if you ask customers what is your top three frustration when working with partners all over the world, my observation, they will say one of the top 3 points is they keep on billing and they never stop. And isn't it interesting? It's a top three frustration that still the majority of the partners measure and compensate their own teams on one of the top three things that customers hate. I can't explain this. I can't understand.
In a certain world or worldview, I guess you would say, in a certain worldview, it almost seems like an insurmountable challenge. But like you said, there are partners that are changing their perspective on this. And oftentimes, I mean, I think one of the interesting ways that you have worked, right, in the way that you do what you do, is that you will actually, at the request of partners, talk to, well, either, I don't know if it's more common that it's a client that they already have or a prospect that they're trying to get become engaged with, and you will talk sort of directly to that buying organization about what they're going to be, what kind of decision they're trying to make, or how they plan to engage in an ERP investment, right? Can you talk a little bit more about that, like essentially being called in to talk to a client or prospect of a partner? Is that something is that a common way that you get engaged?
Well, I do work with partners in different ways. Let's say one of them is they invite me to present at their events. And often I find out that they would like me to play the bad cop role, to be blunt, to be direct, to be brutal. And they hope that people laugh about what I do, and they laugh about my slides because they're provocative, and I use music and I use interaction and engagement. So it's like you could say kind of a show. But of course, we all expect and hope that the messages will continue. And I'm a strong believer that partners should change their skill set in not just tech talk only, like a lot of them do today. It's copilot, 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 right? Whatever you're going to do with it, and whatever the contribution to success is. And I think that partners should learn to be brutal themselves. And I think partners should, be motivated and be trained and inspired to come up with better questions, and to call out the elephant in the room. Because a lot of time that's not happening, because they're afraid of losing the customer, they're afraid of losing the deal. There's other partners that would take the deal. And I'm a strong believer that the more blunt you are, the more direct, the more focused you are on making the customer successful, the more attractive you are.
When it comes to partners, what are some of the benefits that you talk about for them to focus on customer success?
So that's a good question, Jason, because it's not all about what's in for the customers, because that's clear. Customers need success. In these days, customers cannot afford failure anymore like they did in the past. World is running too fast. Competition is going too hard. But of course, there's also a lot of benefits for partners. So I ask partners if I have a conversation about that, about their numbers. And one of my favorite questions is how much money they lost in the last 12 months on working for free in the projects, on sending credit invoices because customers don't want to pay, on penalties they get from customers, on legal claims they get, and finally on churn, loss of contracts. So, and if you talk to partners, there is a difference, of course, between Business Central partners, who are usually smaller than F&O partners, but even in the average BC partner, you talk easily about 200,000 euros plus per year, year after year. So it's, I would say, strange that if partners lose so much money and so much capacity, that they don't, take more initiative, to say it this way. They don't put more effort in preparing their customers. Is it something
Yeah.
they don't see the value of? Is it that they don't have the skills or the ability? They don't take the time? I'm talking with a few partners as we speak to make my workshops, ERP masterclasses, a standard part of their methodology. So some of them do it already and they deliver these workshops in the shortlist phase. And then the customer feels they're not just selling software to me, but they really help me to achieve success. So the ones that do that win more deals in the shortlist phase than with the traditional approach before. And other partners use it as step one of the implementation. So when the contract is signed, they keep their laptops closed. They don't start talking function features, but the first step is to get their board, their senior management, and depends, of course, on the size of your customer or the business unit or whatever, the leading people, put them in a room together and make sure that they get all the lessons that are important around success. So, to summarize, it's important for customers, that's obvious, but it's also super important for partners. There's one more thing that I see recently, Jason, is that there's partners that say it's so difficult to keep my employees, my consultants, my project leaders in my organization because they can start working everywhere. And one partner says, I want to avoid to get my people in the wrong projects. Because imagine you get involved in a project where the customer is not prepared, where they expect the partner to do everything, where they don't take the responsibility for their own jobs and tasks. You get soon a toxic environment. And this specific partner says, I don't want to get in those toxic environments because then at the end of the day, my people will leave and go work somewhere else. So I would say that's another good argument that I can understand to make sure that your customers are prepared when you start the project.
Oh, no question. I mean, I've heard stories of that exact nature, that when a project spins out of control for some of the reasons that you've explained here, yeah, I think the hiring climate or the employment climate in the Business Central space, for example, is such that, the worker might say, I don't need this kind of aggravation. I can find a better situation for myself, more rewarding, less toxic and less unhappiness. So yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Are there other stories that you might, or examples that you could share while we're on this topic of customers that you have worked with, whether you can name them or not? I mean, just anecdotes or anything?
I was invited to do a presentation at a kickoff from an international company headquartered in the Netherlands. And that same organization bought Dynamics AX 7 years before. And they asked me 7 years ago to do a workshop again as well. So I warned them and said, the best characteristic of Axapta or AX is its flexibility. But let me be honest with you, the worst characteristic is flexibility as well. So it's your friend and your enemy And I said to them, please make sure that if you want to customize, that it's only done when it's necessary and try to limit it. Well, giving a good advice doesn't always mean that people follow it. So, like 7 years later, they called me again and said, Guus, everything you predicted went live. So, we did customizations and so much that we can't move anymore. And now we decided to move to Dynamics 365, ERP, CRM, customer engagement. So, the full Monty. And they said, we've learned from last time. So, this time we do a kickoff. We invite people from 5 countries. They all fly into the Netherlands, and the kickoff will last 3 days, which is a lot in my experience. And they go visit factories and we'll have discussions, because the ultimate goal is to streamline processes through all the 5 countries and make sure they all work with the same system. So they asked me to do a presentation at that kickoff again. And when the IT manager called me, I said, so what's the goal? Why do you do all this? And she said to me, Guus, the goal is that everybody, 3,500 people in 5 countries, start working with Axapta. So I said, okay. So I work in your organization. I come in the office in the morning, take a coffee, switch my PC on, start Axapta or Dynamics AX, and after 5 minutes, switch it off. Job done. She said, no, that's not what I mean. Well, I said, maybe you have to do some better homework to really define and specify what you want. Then one day later, she called me. She said, can you come to the office? Because our CEO wants to have a small discussion with you. And it was talking one day before my presentation at the kickoff. So I went there and, had a small talk with the CEO. And, so he said, the project we're going to do now with a 3-day kickoff will last 3 years. And we will have to streamline the processes all over the organization. It will be a massive change process, and it's our most strategic project. While he was talking, one of the other guys from the board of directors came in the room, and it was clear to me they had 3 of them. So I said to those 2 of them, so who of you is the sponsor of this strategic project? And they were silent for 2 seconds, and then they looked at each other, and one nicked with his head, and then the other guy says, I think it's me. So I said, well, congratulations with your new job. It looks like you just got a new kind of job and responsibility. So I said, can I ask you, the kickoff is tomorrow. Is your PowerPoint presentation already finished? And he said to me the magic words, Jason. He said, I will not be at the kickoff because I've got something more important to do. So there was a silence of a few seconds. I said, let me try to resume this, if I understand it right. So you're going to spend a small fortune, first of all, to get 100 people flying in from 5 countries to Netherlands for a 3-day kickoff. And then you'll do an implementation from 3 years that is most strategic and the most important project that you have. And is it correct that I just learned that the responsible person from your board is not available for this kickoff because he has something more important to do? And the guy said, that's a correct resume, Guus. So I said, so what do you think is your non-verbal communication if you're not there? He looked at me like, what do you say? What do you mean? I said, well, if people don't do their preparations, if they don't do their homework, if they don't follow all the end user training, you should not be surprised because, like you said non-verbally, it's not such an important project. Well, the IT man, he was in the room. She said nothing, but she looked at me like, fantastic, Guus, that you're the bad cop and you come up with these blunt questions. And of course, one day later, the guy was in, he did a presentation. So what I learned from it, sometimes you need an outsider, fearless or brutal or both, to raise the blunt questions and to make sure that the right people do things at the right time. Like the story?
Yeah, great story. And I see what you mean there. It made me think of, as we were talking, that story and a couple of the earlier points, something that maybe, you don't see as much as I've been seeing because it's maybe a bit North America centric, but there's this, you may have heard that Dynamics GP, the other SMB ERP solution that's been around for so long, I mean, it now has sort of an end of life date. And I'm just looking for something I'll be watching going forward from here are some of the same challenges on an organization by organization basis, right? That the pressure is now going to build on a lot of these companies to make a change, and they're going to have to reckon with the idea that this change is coming. They probably, many of them in some way have needed it for a long time and have avoided it, or have just, lived with the capabilities and limitations of what they have and have had for a decade or much more than that. And now they need to make they're going to have to face these decisions in, 5 years, 6 years. So not a rush, but something that they will reckon with. And one of the anecdotes I've heard more than once is that one of the reasons these companies have stayed on GP and have kind of not looked at changing or moving to a cloud ERP, for example, is the sort of the ownership structures of a lot of these smaller businesses. A lot of them are family owned, older, executives from the older generation, and really who are looking to perhaps get rid of leave the company, depart, exit and hand over the reins to a younger generation before they engage in a project like that, basically to make it the next generation's first big ERP project, right? So I think there's a lot of parallels that we can probably watch going to the future that reflect a lot of what you've already been seeing. And, I think that pattern will sort of continue. That cycle may continue. So it just occurred to me as you were talking that these things won't be ending anytime soon, these concerns.
True. I think it would be good if partners would, use customer preparation as a serious, mature activity that's rewarding and that helps more than customizing or even more Copilot licenses or whatever, right? I think that it not just partners should do that, but I think that Microsoft should do the same. Unfortunately, if Microsoft talks about change in 2 seconds, they talk about products rather than change. And I would say it would be good, it would be nice to hear stories from Microsoft as well about change and to have them putting change, organizational change, and customer preparation higher on the agenda to stimulate partners to do it, maybe to facilitate partners to do it, maybe to put it again in methodology. And I'm pretty sure all the customers in the world will be happy and will be thankful to Microsoft for doing so, because customers can't do it on their own. That's clear to me.
Yeah. One of the things that perennially frustrates me and that I actually learned a little more about recently was the Partner of the Year awards for Microsoft. I'm sure you've seen those, right? And they're at the national level, they're at the international or corporate level. I was talking to a publicist recently who's done work with various partner firms to help them submit those applications for that award. And those are kept in strict secrecy. And that's why you never really know why a company won one of these awards. Sometimes the company will tell the story themselves, but oftentimes they'll just promote that they won it. And you don't know why. And there's always a story behind those. Yep. But, to your point, everyone's nervous to share the stories. And oftentimes we'll just never know from the outside, you and me, what it was that went so well. What kind of successes they really were able to share, what kind of pain points that they were able to fix for a company, whether it was fixing another partner's mistakes or whether it was something else. Those kinds of stories, I would love to learn them, and I think a lot of people in the community would love to learn them.
Yeah,
but
I agree with that. But if you look at like President's Club and Inner Circle, the top 5% of the channel or the top 1%, again, this is driven by revenue, margin, and contributions on money side. And of course, then Microsoft always say, they're so good for their customers. But you never see a small partner that is only focused on success being part of President's Club or Inner Circle. So the messages I think that Microsoft sends are, it's all about money and revenue rather than it's all about happy customers. I recently had a discussion with a partner saying, why don't you come with an award saying we will give an award to the customer that uses our solution for branch XYZ, better than anybody else. That's a great way and free publicity for everybody, that you're not focusing just on revenue and sending bills, but that you're focusing on getting as much out if you can from a solution. And I think that's a great idea for all the channel, to be honest.
Yeah. just one other thing that I think is interesting for the future on the technical side is some of the telemetry, some of the telemetry insights that Microsoft is making available to partners and to their customers. I don't know if you've heard much about that, but it's very technical. But I do wonder whether that will evolve to help partners and customers sort of use that data to perhaps tell a bit more of a story about how well or how successful they're actually feeling about their investment. Over time, there's probably stories in that data to some extent.
True.
Yeah.
But you know what Microsoft did with the user counts and the user statistics? They decided for a few years ago to not publish them. Interesting enough, recently Microsoft came up with a number for BC, the number of 40,000. So I'm curious to hear what Mike Morton is going to tell us at Directions EMEA in November. And that's interesting, but more interesting stuff could be what's the churn, what's the loss of contracts, and is it different per country, and is it going up or down, and what can we do to limit that? I think there's a lot of learnings, but Microsoft Corp will say this is highly confidential, and the shares that we have depend on things like this. So I think it's still a dream that they will ever release that. But there's lots and lots to learn. And it feels a bit silly that Microsoft and her channel keep making the same mistakes, without taking enough learnings from that. I think there's lots and lots of room to improve. But it starts with transparency.
Yeah, and I certainly give you credit for continuing to advocate for that point of view. I know you do it publicly, and you're also pushing people, any chance you get, I think, privately as well. And the story certainly, and the metrics that they will share, it's not going to be as much as most of us would certainly like. You mentioned, I did want to just ask you, you mentioned you'll be at Directions EMEA presenting. Is there anything else you wanted to call attention to in particular about your upcoming plans or activities or anything else?
Well, I keep busy trying to sort of wake up the partners and try to inspire them, and sometimes provoke them on the space there is to improve. And the same story goes for the end users, right? I think partners have improved a lot over the years, but there's still room for improvement. But it's their job; they do it every day. And those poor customers that replace every 8 to 10 years often have no idea where to start, really. Right? So they need a helping hand, either from Microsoft or from the partner or from third parties, like I try to do with my website. I think, doesn't matter who's doing it, but it's super important that customers are prepared. It makes you as a partner more attractive. It makes your implementation go more smooth. It makes your customer more happy. They will stay with you. There's no churn. You make more money. It's really win-win-win. So that's where my focus is, Jason.
Excellent. Well, it's always great to hear your perspective. I'll also be at the Directions EMEA event, so I look forward to saying hello to you there and maybe getting a coffee or something. It's always good to see you again. Thanks so much for taking the time to chat with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
This has been another episode of the MSTW podcast. My thanks once again to Guus for joining me. If you want to learn more about Guus's activities, you can check out erpmasterclass.com. That's his website. And we'll also post a link to an interesting customer story that he recently shared. And that's it for this episode. If you want to get in touch with me, you can also send me an email, jason@msdynamicsworld.com. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World signing off.